Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, Diablo 4's first beta weekend is now underway for those with early access, and while many have been struck with problematic server issues keeping them from playing, there are still a ton of people actually in the game. Hopefully as the weekend continues on, the connection issues will be stabilized so we can all get a good period of time to put our hands on it, but of course there are some important topics to understand as you dive into this game, whether you're able to do it now, tomorrow, a week from now, or on launch, and one of the main ones is skills. Skills define your entire experience in Diablo 4. These are your basic attacks, your core skills, your defensive, your big meaty fun ultimate abilities, and all of the things in between. Every type of action that your character can take aside from the basic movement and dodge is defined by skills. With that said, skills are acquired through the skill tree that you can look at by pressing A, and you unlock new skills with skill points. At first you'll only have access to the basic skill node cluster. Every grouping of skills on your tree is called a node cluster, and this is simply the first one. Basic skills define your default attack for your class. These are free to use and have no cooldown. They are your most spammable ability. For Barbarian and Druid, these will also build your resources up, and for the other classes they are simply the abilities that have no cost of any kind. Each skill in a big square box on your tree is an active skill. It takes one of the slots on your bar, and while you can equip multiple basic and core skills, there are usually more benefits to mixing it up and having a skill from multiple different node clusters on your bar. Active skills can have up to 5 points put into them, with each point increasing their damage and sometimes their secondary effect potency as well. Attached to each active skill are diamond-shaped nodes. These nodes are skill enhancements. They either make the active skill more effective or augment it in some way to add more secondary effects. A good example on my current character, a Barbarian, is Flay. Flay does a small amount of immediate damage but applies a ton of bleed damage that happens over time. If you then go to the first diamond beside it, which is Enhanced Flay, you get a 10% chance to make an enemy vulnerable for 2 seconds after hitting them with this ability. Vulnerable increases all damage done to the target by 20% while applied, so essentially this enhancement makes Flay start to stack debuffs on a single targeted enemy. For the most part, every active skill has 3 enhancements, with the first one being guaranteed the one that you have to pick, but then you have to pick between the other 2, such as with Whirlwind here. The first enhancement is simply Fury Gain, but then you can either make it so Whirlwind does 30% increased damage when it is channeled for longer than 2 seconds, or alternatively you can instead choose Furious Whirlwind, which makes it also deal 20% of its base damage as a bonus bleed effect on enemies hit over 5 seconds if you use a slashing weapon for it. One of these essentially benefits long, consistently spinning Whirlwind, and the other benefits shorter bursts of Whirlwind every few seconds. These can create totally different playstyles around them, and of course you have to keep in mind that this would only be one of the 6 active skill slots that you can have assigned at any given time. Past this, most of the nodes also have these little circles which denote passive skills. These simply give you permanent buffs in the background. They don't use your 6 slots, they're just constantly active on your character. Generally speaking, for your 6 skill slots, you are allowed to pick any combination that you'd like, aside from only being able to use one ultimate ability, but there are also some things to consider for general progression and making builds as you move through the game. Usually you only want one basic skill on your bar. These are your sort of resource generator for the classes that need to gain resources, or the things to use when you're in low resource mode on the ones that can only spend. Generally, you just want to pick the one that fits the build that you're going for and go all in on that, upgrading it properly, leaving you 5 slots for other types of more impactful skills. There is usually no massive benefit to having multiple basic skills. One resource generator will usually cover that requirement, and having one skill that is buffed with loads of enhancements is generally stronger than having 2 skills that are far less upgraded. Core skills will then make up the meat of your build for the most part, being your no cooldown resource spenders. For Barbarian, these are called Fury skills. For Sorcerer, they are called Major Destruction skills. For Druid, they are called Spirit skills, and so on. The way to look at these is they are basically your spammable resource spenders. These generally do significantly more damage than basic skills, and also sometimes have interesting secondary effects too. They cost some of your class resources to use, but they have no cooldown attached to them. When your resources are high, you want to use these skills to do damage. When your resources are low, you want to use basic skills in order to let your resources build back up. That is the simple loop and definition of these 2 skill categories and how they work together. As you level up further though, you'll gain access to further node clusters. You can see numbers in the middle of each node cluster. This represents the number of skill points that you will need to have spent as a whole in order to unlock that cluster and the nodes attached to it. Once you pass these first 2 node clusters, things get a bit more interesting too. Skills past this usually contain things like defensive skills, mobility skills, or most importantly, ultimate abilities, of which you can only equip 1. All of these have cooldowns attached to them, so yeah, they are completely unspammable, but they also do not cost resources to use. So instead of considering your generation and spending for these ones, you simply need to watch the cooldowns when you have them equipped. The main exception to this this is the Sorcerer class, which has abilities in the Mastery node cluster further on that also cost mana but do not have a cooldown, simply giving them more options for resource spending and less options for cooldown based skills. Generally speaking, a proper build further in the game will consist of one basic skill, one or two core skills, one ultimate skill, and then the other slots will be a mix of your various cooldown abilities depending on what rounds out your build's goals the most. For the most part in the early game though, you should feel totally free to experiment with loads of different skills all at the same time. Resetting your skill points is completely free until level 15, so take advantage of that time to try literally everything out, see what feels comfortable to you, and then go with it. Above level 15 you can still reset your skill points, but it does come at a price. It's also worth noting that you can actually reset skill points individually for a lower cost, rather than always having to reset your entire tree. Generally speaking, as far as a loadout goes in the early game, I'd recommend having a single target basic skill and an AoE core skill on the go. Usually AoE combat will be more bursty, so using it as your resource spend is a good idea. Having a good upgraded single target basic skill as well will let you chunk through bosses pretty well anyways. An exception to this is the Rogue, which just has strong basic skills, so there is of course benefit to having multiple of them at the same time, and I would also say when you are super early game there is definitely benefit to having multiple basic skills on every class just to give you more options in combat. Things like the Barbarian getting Lunging Strike just for some more mobility, even if your main basic skill that you use is instead Frenzy. That said, let's talk about some good early game builds really quickly. For Barbarian, a good couple of things to focus on are the Frenzy basic skill and the Whirlwind core skill. Frenzy lets you gain building attack speed the more that you use it in a row and generates Fury really fast as a result of this. It also does pretty decent single target damage too. Whirlwind is your AoE attack. You hold it down and it uses 20 Fury per second, doing decent damage per swing to everything near you. Lunging Strike as a basic attack is good to have for movement in a fight, and Rend is a great secondary core ability to have early on as well for bosses, as Bleed is obviously good against anything that will live longer than a few seconds to get the full damage in. As for Sorcerer, this one is relatively simple and it depends on your goals. Fire element skills do burn damage, which is damage over time, lightning element spells do lots of AoE damage really quick, and cold spells do decent damage but apply slow and occasional full frozen effect as well. In our experience, the ice basic skill is generally the strongest, and then pair that with chain lightning for mass AoE, and your early game build is pretty much well set off for those two alone. Then for Rogue, I would generally avoid using melee skills unless you really want to live up to that double dagger class fantasy, as the bow and bow skills are simply just stronger for multiple reasons for Rogue. The first is that you are the least tanky class in the game and tend to rely more on movement to avoid attacks, so ranged is just a safer way to function in general, but they also just tend to do more damage than your melee skills anyways. In the early game, the basic skill that you really want is Heartseeker Arrow, giving you higher crit chance against a single enemy as you stack it, and then you get into more core skills. There's a lot of good stuff going on there too. Barrage is great for large packs of enemies, shooting out 5 arrows in a cone with a ricochet chance on hit. Penetrating Shot hits all enemies in front of you in a line, and then Rapid Fire is your good boss killer core skill, firing off a number of arrows in a row for single target damage. On the note of skills as well, you're probably wondering if there are any extra ways to actually get skill points. Of course, you do get a skill point every time you level up your character, but this only happens until level 50, and there is a max level of level 100. There are generally quite a few things that you want to spend your skill points on, and what you'll be happy to know is that there is actually another way to get skill points in Diablo 4 aside from leveling, and right now that is the Renown system. In each area that you visit, there are loads of side activities, things that don't have anything to do with your main quests. As you complete these side activities, you will gain Renown for that area. At Renown level 1 and 3 for each area, you will get 1 bonus skill point for every character on your account, meaning if you get these upgrades, then make a brand new character, they'll actually start with a chunk of skill points even at level 1, which is a really neat way to incentivize having multiple characters in the first place. And that's about it then, everyone. A guide to the general concept of skills in Diablo 4, how the skill tree works in this game, as it is quite different from previous Diablo games, much closer to Diablo 2 than it is to Diablo 3, but still different to even that, as well as a bit of a talk about how to get skill points, as there are those neat little ones that you can pick up that are account wide and don't even come from leveling itself, and then finally a bit of a talk about general building concepts and philosophies for your skills. For a recap, generally one basic skill will do once you move into the mid-game. Core skills are your big important stuff, ultimate abilities are of course your big powerful moves that have long cooldowns, and then most classes will have 3 other node clusters of abilities that have shorter cooldowns and varied usage, from defensive power to mobility to even just multiplayer buffs that affect an entire party. I wish you all luck with your time playing Diablo 4's beta. I hope you have fun, and I hope you get some cool legendaries to mess around with too, even though progress does reset before the main game. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, soon. Until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.